Dear colleagues, welcome to this session, which is basically focusing on ethics and learning analytics. And my name is Morten Flate Paulsen, which is a Norwegian name. And I'm having a very international panel here today. But first, I would like to share a few facts with you. And I hope I will get this clicker to work. Yeah. We have prepared a questionnaire or a survey about these topics, which you can, if you want, give some feedback to us during the session. And it is available on our ICD Facebook page, where you can see the address on here. And I hope that you, during the session, can give us some feedback if you like. And maybe we will comment on some of those questions and feedbacks during the session. Before I go further into the details here, we have chosen to show a short video to share this with you. It's a 5-minute video from the Wall Street Journal, and I would like to introduce this video now and play it for the entire 5 minutes. So please watch.
红色是表示你的专注力显示得很高。
Teachers at this primary school in China
蓝色是走神了，
know exactly when someone isn't paying attention.
白色就是你可能跟网络还没有连接好。
These headbands measure each student's level of concentration. The information is then directly sent to the teacher's computer and to parents. China has big plans to become a global leader in artificial intelligence. It has enabled a cashless economy where people make purchases with their faces. A giant network of surveillance cameras with facial recognition helps police monitor citizens. Meanwhile, some schools offer glimpses of what the future of high-tech education in the country might look like.
做出选择吧 Good job.
Classrooms have robots that analyze students' health and engagement levels. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations. There are even surveillance cameras that monitor how often students check their phones or yawn during classes. These gadgets have alarmed Chinese netizens. But schools say it wasn't hard for them getting parental consent to enroll kids into what is one of the world's largest experiments in AI education. A program that's supposed to boost students' grades while also feeding powerful algorithms.
为了就是国家的这个研究呀、发展呀，我觉得是没有问题的。
The government has poured billions of dollars into the project, bringing together tech giants, startups, and schools. We got exclusive access to a primary school a few hours outside of Shanghai.
2、3，同学们早上好。
To see firsthand how AI tech is being used in the classroom. For this 5th grade class, the day begins with putting on a brainwave sensing gadget. Students then practice meditating.
现在想象我们眉心有一点柔和的光芒绽放。
The device is made in China and has 3 electrodes, 2 behind the ears and 1 on the forehead. These sensors pick up electrical signals sent by neurons in the brain. The neural data is then sent in real time to the teacher's computer. So while students are solving math problems, a teacher can quickly find out who's paying attention and who's not.
说明这段时间他是有点在那走神的。
A report is then generated that shows how well the class was paying attention. It even details each student's concentration level at 10-minute intervals. It's then sent to a chat group for parents.
就是他可以看到每个人的评分。
The reports are detailed, but whether these devices really work and what they exactly measure isn't as clear. We were curious if the headbands could actually measure concentration, so one of our reporters tried on the device.
但我没有感觉自己特别集中。
这个就是
This is a new technology with still fairly little research behind it.
Theodore Zanto is a neuroscientist at the University of California, San Francisco. He was surprised to learn that this tech, called electroencephalography, also known as EEG, is being used in the classroom on children. It's usually used by doctors in hospitals and labs.
EEG is very susceptible to artifacts. And so if you are itchy or just a little fidgety, or the EEG wasn't set up properly so that the electrodes didn't have a good contact, affects the signal.
Despite the chances for false readings, teachers told us the headbands have forced students to become more disciplined.
上课回答我的问题，就是他们的声音会比平常更响亮。
Teachers say the students now pay better attention during class, and that has made them study harder and achieve higher scores.
上课认真听讲，作业做的基本上是全对的。
But not all students are as enthusiastic.
就是自己感觉是脑筋，我感觉这里有个紧的。
This fifth grader, whom we caught dozing off in class, told us his parents punish him for low attention scores. And that kind of data adds a new kind of pressure for students.
你想啊，如果在一次考试全班人都考了95分以上，就你考了一个85，你会不会感觉你有一种
Companies we interviewed said the data can go to government-funded research projects. We spoke to parents who were unclear about where the data ended up, and they didn't seem to care too much. Santos says there's likely no privacy protection at all.
In a classroom, if you're trying to make an assessment of an individual student, you really can't anonymize it.
Experts and citizens alike are sounding alarms about various aspects of the country's huge push into artificial intelligence. These classrooms are laboratories for future generations. And while these new tools may potentially help some 200 million students raise their grades, just how this all works out won't be apparent until they become adult citizens.
Wow. The panelists, can you please come to the front? This session has been organized by ICDE, the International Council of Open and Distance Education, and I am working as acting Secretary General of the organization. We have a small secretariat with an office in Oslo, Norway. And we have a lot of members around the world, and we have a large network, and we've used this network to gather some experts about learning analytics and ethics, and ask them to comment from their perspectives about what we are discussing today. Here you can see some of the people that have been involved. Alan Tate, for example, has also been preparing this. He's from the Open University of the UK, and the picture on the lower part of the screen here is from our planning session last week, and it was a tough discussion, as you can see. And just a few words about our organization so we know what we are dealing with. We had our 80th anniversary last year. We have individual members, student members, and collaboration with regional partners all around the world. And we have been a partner with UNESCO for 50 years within our field. And we have got some financial support from the Norwegian government. But basically we have, as you can see from the map here, a little bit more than 200 institutional members from around the world. The major large open universities are members. And altogether we estimated that these universities have about 17 million students. So we are a really old and really global organization working within the field of open and distance education. The video you just saw is available online, and if this is available somewhere after the session, you can click on the link there. We had actually a discussion whether we should show this because it is a little scary, and we also would like that you can see some of the benefits, not only the scary stuff here. So I hope that the panelists will discuss on this. I did some thinking myself before I came here, and I was a little scared when I read an article in a Norwegian magazine, the one on the left here, saying that I regret that I sent my DNA to the US for checking his DNA, because this guy said that when my data is in there, it's okay for me, but now I realize that I share the DNA with all my family. And if this data is going to be connected with, for example, some learning analytics, what will that do to my relatives? I was also a little bit apprehensive when I saw that Google is trying to buy or buying Fitbit. What if the data from your Fitbit gadget is gathered and shared with some of the learning analytics? What will that have to say? And just a few projects that we have been working with in ICDE. One is the EPICA project, where we are dealing with e-learning portfolios. Students put their portfolios into digital systems that are shared with others, not only the university, not only themselves, but external repositories. What will happen with that kind of data? And what will happen with the electronic badges, and when people, universities, institutions start to share their grades and badges in open repositories. These are examples of projects that we have been dealing with our people around the world in ICDE. So we publish a number of reports, and here are some of them. You can see others on this website. But one of the reports is the Global Guidelines Ethics in Learning Analytics, which is the topic of this session. And it can be downloaded from our website if you like. And it is, as I perceive it, more like a discussion paper on the issues that we should be aware of. And I'm pretty sure that during this panel session, we will get into some of those issues that are raised in this report. And that was my introduction, and we will have 2 short presentations before we start delving into the panel discussion. And I really hope that we can have some interaction with the audience. So with these words, Barbara, you are the first one to present.
Okay, I was asked to give a little bit of an overview of the kind of systems that we're talking about. The one we saw in China is not the standard everywhere, so I will take a little bit of a backwards look at what we have. So first of all, what is artificial intelligence? Well, I like the definition from the US National Artificial Intelligence Strategy Plan report, and artificial intelligence enables computers or other automated systems to perform tasks that we have historically required human cognition and what we typically consider human decision-making abilities. So things like natural language, reasoning, problem solving, vision, those kinds of abilities that we have as humans, and we now help machines do those things. Learning analytics, it's more of an emerging field. It started around 2010, and it's defined as the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about students and their contexts for the purposes of understanding and optimizing learning in the environments in which it occurs. So this is because of we have been doing learning analytics all along, but now there are suddenly much easier access to larger sets of data, and so this field has emerged about trying to make sense of what we can do with this data. Okay, so then I'll just give some examples that we can use to think about questions about what's going on with the data and what kind of issues around privacy and security and ethics might arise with some of these. Artificial intelligence in education has been around for a long time. These kinds of systems, which are called cognitive tutors, have been developed by colleagues at CMU, and they've now got a company called Carnegie Learning. And these systems have their roots already in the 1980s. And what they do here is they build up a knowledge base of information about you as a student as you interact with the system, in this case doing algebra. And it can use that information in order to adapt what they're going to give you next to do, what kind of feedback they're going to give you, what kind of hinting they should give. So the idea here is that this system can help you and adapt by giving you what's just in your zone of proximal development, we could say, so that you're going to get tasks that you can do. The thing about this particular kind of system is that they can build up an understanding of what you know and don't know, because of the type of logic they use in the systems. And this is very different than the more recommender-based systems that we see today that are really just statistically oriented. Here they really try to build up a knowledge of what you know and don't know so they can give you feedback on misconceptions. This is another kind of system. This one is for surgeons training, and here they can use a simulation to practice their surgical skills. You have a device that you hold, and you can actually just push on a block that's beside you, and you can get feedback about the angle that you're holding, the instrument, how hard you're pushing, the order in which you do things. So it takes very detailed information about how you're working with the system and gives you feedback on that. And we have one at my university for dentists. It's absolutely amazing. You're like drilling teeth and moving around and really getting good feedback on what you're doing. So here they're collecting data on all these little movements you're making with this device and giving you personalized feedback. Back to CMU, Justine Cassell and colleagues, they work at building these artificially intelligent tutors, and they use avatars, which are person-like figures, and students can interact with them. In this particular case, they have good results with autistic children who actually often have problems reading all the senses that they have to read on humans, and they can make it less complicated with the avatars. So here again, it's about interacting and about helping and solving. You can have these as a peer, so they can be your friend that you interact with, or it could be a teacher who has some tutoring for you as well. This is another example of what we call an intelligent tutoring system, where you have a simulation lab. This is done by Janice Goldberg and colleagues when she was at Worcester Polytech. She's now at Rutgers. And here students are learning the scientific method. And what happens is they set a hypothesis, they identify what variables they want to test, and then they manipulate the simulation. The system has a whole set of rules to determine whether students understand the relationship between the hypothesis they make and the variables they're manipulating. So it's collecting data on how you're interacting with the simulation in order to give you feedback. They do an assessment of you while you're working with it, and they've done large comparisons with thousands of students, and they find about a 95% accuracy between the system doing a diagnosis of what you know and don't know versus what a human could do. So this is very nice to be able to put things on scale. The teachers can get a learning analytics dashboard like this that gives you information about the different stages in the scientific method: hypothesis formation, designing, conducting experiments, data interpretation, and communicating findings. And you can drill down, say the yellow one on the top is presented here, and there we have all the students that are having trouble with hypothesis formation, and maybe the teacher could decide to give a little lecture on how to form hypothesis. At least they know where in the process of doing the scientific method that students are struggling. Most people here probably have tried Duolingo. Duolingo uses artificial intelligence and analytics as well to give you a personalized experience especially with their chat bot. So here they're collecting data about you. In all the examples so far, they have been used sort of more in classrooms, and we know that the data is probably being held at the school or within the school boundaries. Here, your data is going somewhere. Do people know where it's going, and does it matter? So that's a good question. This is Jill Watson. She was this is her third year. This was when she was 2, and they had managed to have all the students at Georgia Tech not understand that the chatbot they were talking to was actually a computerized chatbot. This one uses the Watson technology, and again, the students can interact with this and ask about lots of questions related to campus life. This is a colleague in EPFL, and they have developed, together with a group at University of Lisbon, a robot that students teach the robot how to write. So the students are practicing their handwriting skills at the same time as they're giving interaction to the robot, and it's collecting all sorts of pattern matching data and movement data that's going on here. And they use AI to help figure out what to do next. This is a European project that was looking at students learning fractions. All the systems we've seen, except for the robot, were based on just typing in information. Here you can talk to the system. So it's using speech recognition, and it's trying to identify emotions from the speech that you're talking about, so they can try then to adapt the system based on sort of the emotional feelings. This one is fun. This is a system that's using computer vision and voice recognition, and it can give you feedback on your presentation skills. So you can get feedback on should you talk louder or softer, should you stop moving your arms so much, all of these kinds of things. So this one, again, is collecting data in a different modality than just interaction. This one is a little bit cool. This is Lumiose. So this is a project at University of Philadelphia, I think. And here we have a teacher using some glasses, which they're calling Lumio. And what she's seeing when she looks through these glasses is they're seeing what's going on in the classroom. So this is mixed reality and physical and augmented reality together to give you a view of what's going on in the classroom. We'll try to play the video here now.
Working with K-12 math teachers, we've designed Lumilo, a pair of eyeglasses that tune teachers in to the real-time assessments that drive intelligent learning software. When a teacher glances around the room, Lumilo allows them to instantly see when students are currently struggling in the software, doing well, or when they're unlikely to master certain skills without an intervention from the teacher. In addition, Lumilo lets teachers see when students have been idle for a while or are currently misusing the software by abusing hints or gaming the system. When a teacher gazes at a student's indicator, the system explains why this alert is showing. And when a teacher clicks on a student, a deep dive window appears, debriefing the teacher on what the student is currently working on and the areas in which the student is struggling the most. After providing help, the teacher can set a reminder to check in again soon with this student and can monitor whether the student improves over the next few minutes or might need another intervention from the teacher. Teachers can also monitor a summary of the whole classroom's performance to decide whether a class-level intervention, such as a mini-lecture, might be in order. Glancing around the class over the next few minutes then becomes a fast way to sense whether or not the intervention worked.
Okay, so there we've got collecting information. The nice thing here is they're visualizing it not on like a screen or an iPad, which you'd have to carry around with you. You can just look at your class and see where everybody needs help. So again, they're collecting this data in an adaptive learning system and then visualizing what's going on with the whole entire class for the teacher. Okay. Just a few more here. This one was the very first institutional learning analytics system that was developed. It was called Course Signals, and it was developed at Purdue University, and it gives you an idea of how you're doing in the class and predicting whether you're going to fail it or not. So it's using a lot of behavioral information about you as a student, if you're going to class, how you're using the online learning environment, and different things like that. So this campus collection of data is another thing that's being used right now. This is the example of a dashboard from the Open University, where it's an all online university, so they do have a lot of data that they collect, and they can show each course instructor information about the students in their class, and they have a prediction as to whether they're going to pass or fail it. So this is another way to do it. This is class-based. Here are what some researchers try to do with some of this data as they try to predict and classify. So you have like dropouts and you have good students and bad students. So they're giving labels and classifying and clustering people together with all the data that they're collecting. What are they doing with that data? And what are you getting labeled for the rest of your life as a dropout or something? That's a good thing to know. And the one thing that we know from a PhD that I was an opponent on in the Netherlands is that this is actually MOOC data. In a MOOC, you actually have what this one group has managed to identify is that you actually do have people that are just in the system to find out something, and when they find it out, they drop out. So they're not really a dropout. They were in there as an auditing of the system or something. So you have to know the intention of taking the course. And finally, we look at China, as we've seen in the first video, and we heard the nice presentation this morning on Squirrel AI. Here's an example where they're collecting data real-time all over the country. This is the Chinese National Assessment Center for Educational Quality. They get data from the whole country. They can zoom into a particular region, keep going into a region, or go to a neighborhood and get real-time update on whatever quality measures they're measuring there as well. And then, as we know from this morning's presentation, Squirrel AI has the ambition to give a one-to-one tutor to every student so that everybody has their own personalized learning. And we can ask questions. This is great to adapt it to you within a course material, but are we building models of all of us as an individual, as a student over time, and what consequences will that have?
Thank you, Barbara. I would like to have some comments. Some comments from the audience, but while you're thinking and giving me a signal, Barbara, you have one perspective of this. Could you say where you come from? It's learning analytics, the national, yeah, because we have an international audience here.
I'm the director for a national center in Norway for learning analytics, and one thing we're looking at is what can be done with all of this data, or what is being done. We ask critical questions as well as try to explore what can be done. And one of my issues about all of this data is that we have the data that computer scientists decide they're going to store out of these systems, and it's not always the data that an educational researcher would want to have to be able to answer questions about learning or about progression in learning and things like that. So the data, we can challenge the data as well, the quality of the data, and if we have what we want of data and whether it's useful or not.
Thank you. And we have one comment or question from the audience.
Hello, Barbara. Thank you. It's Mike Sharple from the Open University. So it's a really good overview of the state of the art, but also some of the previous work. I mean, I would just say two things. One, going back to what Audrey Waters said, we should learn from the past. So many of these techniques and technologies have been around probably for 20, 30 years, not just in the labs, but also in the classroom. So in the UK, for example, in the 1990s, there were systems called integrated learning systems that they put into classrooms, with real kids in real classrooms, and they got a lot of information about what worked and what didn't work. I mean, what worked was that people were excited about them when they put into the classroom. What didn't work is they didn't raise scores, and children got very bored with them. I mean, it's the problem with personalised learning is that when you do it over long periods, it's very boring. And I think the real opportunity now is to say, how can we use AI not just in an individualized way, but also in a social way, and in an ethically responsible way. So, just because we can do it doesn't mean to say we should do it. And I think the opportunity is to use AI in much more socially responsible ways rather than just in individualized ways.
Thank you, that was really good. And I hope we will have some good discussions in the room today. Would you like to comment on that, Barbara, or should we go on? Yeah. Okay, so we'll have another perspective on these issues, and this time it is a short introduction from Anita, and you will present yourself and your thoughts. Please.
Hello, everybody. I hope you see me. I always have a problem in Norway because all the facilities are meant for 1 meter 80. So I'm just even equivalent of an 8-year-old child in Norway. So I have to get used to it. And in life, it's also a lot of adjustment in that. Just to introduce myself, my name is Anto Andres Kamler. So the name says it all. I'm a Vietnamese from origin. I'm married to a Swiss, but I do bear a name of German as well. I'm working as a program executive on ethics education for a foundation in Switzerland, based in Switzerland, but it covers the whole world on applied ethics across sectors. So applied ethics is not necessarily moral education where you should do this, you should do that, you should not do this. But applied ethics is more the right way according to a code of ethics or a code of conduct depending on which field you applied. Today I'm asked to do a short presentation on big data and how does the ethicist point of view says about it. So I just extract one module, a very small extract about the definition of what is cyberspace. So in short, we tend to divide the world into real and non-real. So what is non-real on the cloud we call cyber, and what is real is physical. But actually in our head, from our head to the reality, there are lots of process that we are not even aware of. So I will skip all that, but to address only what is the definition or the specificities of the cyberspace. We can say that there are many dimensions: time, space, size, virtual against reality, anonymous against individual or claim authorness, financial aspects or cost, and the question of power. So according to the specificity of the cyberspace, we can define what we try to treat as a cyberspace and what is already treated in science. The cyberspace is a little bit more complicated because it depends on how you interpret the data. It requires a methodology, it requires a consensus between academia, and then it requires also a consensus thus between companies who wants to apply this data in reality in the fabrication of their products or in the application of some services, for example, in health or in education. And that is why it requires a lot of interpretation, and Globe Ethics is a global network of academia who tries to define values that are commonly shared and integrate into a dialogue between different cultural backgrounds in order to live in peace. In other words, we try to construct peace on the understanding or the tolerance of each other in spite of all our difference of values. So if you look at the, can you, okay, sorry. The green one, okay. So this is what I was trying to say. You see that in time, cyberspace can be any time because that's no time bounded. It is fast, it's speedy, it's not bound to time. The challenge is sometimes the time differences can be underestimated. Just to take an example, when you read a book of an author, Balzac is one of them, my favorite others, you see that sometimes the description in the book is so real, you think that the book describes what we are living now, but actually it's 300 years ago or something like that. The second one is cyberspace is everywhere. It's global and it's unbound also. So we don't have how do you call it? Border control, because there's no border control on our head also. So the human body is bound a lot to space. It's bound because of the boundary, but it's bound also because of the physical conditions. It's bound also on climate, on environment, on the settings, and so on. So it shapes also the way that we interpret life. The third one is the cyberspace is the mass production. We talk about big data. It reaches great number, but it's sometimes overwhelming and too complex and not surely very accurate, because it depends on how you program or you define the criteria for evaluation. The third point is virtual cyber versus reality. Sometimes cyberspace is known to be virtual, it's digital, it's not material, and it's not physical. And the challenge is that we have to to make the distinction between real and virtual. And sometimes, as you see the show that you just see now, sometimes we ourselves also mix the reality with what we see, what we are living in our imagination or on cyberspace and on reality. And it has some consequences in the behavior of some individuals, or maybe all. After that, we have this also cyberspace is anonymous. It facilitates multiple identities, and sometimes because you are not accountable on your own person, because you are behind the screen, or you can hide yourself behind a fake identity, you can be also behave dishonestly. Whereas if you have to face your parents every day, you cannot lie 24 hours on 24 hours. But in cyberspace, sometimes people are living in another form of identity rather than in reality. And in terms of cost, the cost and capital structures, because of the cyberspace has no boundary, we don't know who is the authorship, and so on and so forth. the boundary on cost and the real cost of the cyberspace is sometimes unknown. And the last one was the, on power, the cyberspace seems to be democratic, participatory, and open. That means that everybody can create an email, everybody can talk, and so on. But sometimes behind you don't know, but there is also a power structure that is often hidden from the public. And that makes cyberspace a bit scary, or a lot scary, depending on how much you know about what is hidden and what you don't know yet, and how it affects you. Because of all that, we are talking about something that is unknown, and on the point of view of the ethicists, I was asked to represent my organization, which is Globe Ethics, and my superior, who is Professor Stickelberger, who is a very known ethicist, to talk about a certain aspect which is applied to the interpretation of how big data can affect our life on a personal level as well as on a societal level. So if you look at the dimensions, you see that the cyber ethics have different dimensions. You see cultural, life, community, environment, politics, and economics. We don't see that, but all these are all interdependent with each other. We can't say that I work in a school, so I only care about books and education. I don't care about social. Because when you just step out of the school, you have to face with social. So in everything now, cyber ethics touches all that in one space, which is called cyberspace. Here's the list of what it entails, and of course in our work we have 8 million documents online for those who are interested on ethics to explore, and you are free to put up projects which we support in education and research, and also teaching ethics, in integrating ethics into your teaching curriculum. And that's why we are here together with ICDE, of whom we are a member, to promote distance learning education with the ethical dimension. When we are talking on what basis we can pronounce or we can give some opinion, it is not like in scientific where everything is black and white. But we do have some kind of logic that we are based on, and that's about the 3 of values and virtues. You see here, on the 3 of values and virtues, you can see that they are independent from each other. They are interdependent with each other. For example, here we have the values interconnection between responsibility, freedom, justice, peace, security, community, stewardship, participation, that is inclusiveness or participation in the sense of democratic participation. And then you have the virtues interconnection, which is the virtues is integrity, compassion, transparency, accountability, respect, courage, generosity, etc. So you see that there is a difference between values, which are what we hope, what we consider as good by per se as values, and virtues is more like you have to bring your own effort to make it a character of your society, of your own or your behavior, and so on. So ethics is about recognition of what is necessary to help you to behave rightly in the right circumstances. So there's no clear law, you should not do this because it's wrong, but you are encouraged not to do this because it may harm somebody. So basically, the conclusion of what is ethical in the eyes of many ethicists is do no harm. So long that you don't do harm to human or non-human, so long that you encourage communication and social inclusiveness or cohesion, you can consider that you already do right. And so in my Buddhist point of view, we have these 5 principles, which is don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't use bad words to lead to misinterpretation, and don't indulge in how do you say that? Adultery. Sorry, I forgot that word. So basically, if you look at all the religions, we do have some basics, values that we can start negotiating or communicating with each other. I was asked by Morten to tell something about myself. So I can say that being French educated at age 2, then I switched on English educated at age 10, and then I started with the learning of some languages. Now I count as 8 languages and being interpreter in 5. Living in different countries, going to different universities, learning across all disciplines and so on. It requires a lot of adaptability to do that. And one of the reasons I think that helps people who come from Global South to survive in Global North is that we start always with the acceptation that we are in a new country, we have to learn a new language, we have to adapt, and not saying that in my country it's like this, so you have to follow my rules. So I would like to conclude that that is part of the experience that I would like to bring and share with you today. And of course, I'm open to join the panel to answer questions if it is within my knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anita. I think you have given quite a good framework for further discussion here. And before I will introduce the other members of the panel, I would like to have one comment, one question from the audience, please. Give me a sign. Don't be shy. Come on. Okay. Now we kind of have seen that there are cultural backgrounds and differences related to these issues that we are discussing. And we have more people in the panel, and they will not give speeches, but I will try to allow them to say at least a couple of sentences about themselves. And I will start from our left side here with Snorre. Who are you?
Thank you very much. My name is Snorre. I work at the ICD office, and I'm here in the capacity of being the data protection officer at ICD and at a couple of our projects. I hope I can kind of give a legal perspective on what we are going to discuss.
And you are also monitoring the questionnaire that is online, so if someone sends in something there, you will be able to see it, and I know that you already have got some interesting comments. So maybe we'll look at that later on. Exactly. And then we have...
Crohor.
That's exactly what I'm going to say.
Yeah. No, it's another tough name, but Crohor McLaughlin is my name. It's an Irish name. I'm from Dublin in Ireland. I work in Dublin City University, So I'm a PhD student, and I also work in the National Institute for Digital Learning. So we've been in this space for quite a while and have a lot of experience. But I guess what's interesting, or the perspective I'm trying to bring, is as a current PhD student and someone who's probably starting out in that sense as well. So these are big questions that, you know, we have to deal with every day.
And finally, we have Abdallah.
Sorry, I am hard of hearing, so that I have to use that stuff. I'm the Vice Chancellor of the National Open University of Nigeria. The National Open University of Nigeria is the largest ODL institution in Africa. We have about 550,000 students that are enrolled in the program, in various programs. And we are spread throughout Nigeria, including correctional centers. These correctional centers are also known as prisons. So we provide prisoners free education, totally free of charge, so long as they remain in prison. But the moment they get out, they have to pay. So we have cases of people who don't want to pay, who don't want to get out of prison. They want to stay because they are going to get free education. We have currently about 110 active students. The 550,000 that I talk about are totally enrolled, but about 110 are active. That means they are actually engaged in activities. But because we operate a very flexible ODL and online system, they come in when they like, whatever time they like, whenever they like, and therefore they can activate their membership and studentship anytime they like. They can register and then drop their registration for one reason or the other, either because they are working mothers or because they have their own a lot of personal issues or whatever, but then they can stop and then they can decide later on if they want to continue their education, so they don't have to stay and do the education thing continuously. So I'm not sure if this is the proper time to talk about what they have said in terms of how it affects us. But in Africa, we are dealing with the gold standard that has been bequeathed to us by the British colonial administration. Gold standard in education means you sit down in a classroom, there's a teacher who's an enabler of learning, he teaches you, you learn, and you take an examination, you pass, you get a job, and the end of it, that's the end of the story. But ODL and all these cyber things, cyber that are creating new paradigms of learning. And therefore, we are trying to create a dividing line between education and knowledge, because we are looking at knowledge-driven economy, not education economy. Nobody really cares about algebra anymore. Nobody gives a damn about periodic table. You cram periodic table, you cram algebra, you cram all those equations. Where do they take you? What kids now understand, what they want is cloud computing. They want to understand how blockchain management works. They want to understand databases. They want to understand Dropbox. This is what they understand. This is the world. And this is the world that Barbara talked about. This is the world of cyberspace. But at the same time, there is an ethical responsibility that goes with it. And that ethical responsibility in Africa deals with how to find shortcuts, what we call shortcuts, to get to where you want to go. Whereas in developed countries, you all have the technology to enable you to reach and use all these technologies because it's part of the society, it's part of the mindset. Africa requires a total change of mindset. And because the mindset we have currently is the mindset of gold standard that the British colonial administration has imposed on the various countries. And that gold standard is tied down to examinations, tied down to attendance, tied down to physical textbooks. All the materials that we teach about 7,000 courses, all the materials are available online. But students tell me they don't want them online. They want a physical paper. They want a physical material. Because it's only when they have a physical paper that they feel that they are learning something. But if they don't have anything physical, they feel that they are missing something. So they insist that they have to have a physical paper. And it is this paradigm that we are trying to change, because it is an education paradigm, not knowledge-based economy. If you deviate from the syllabus, from the set of instructions that are expected to be examined, then you have a problem if you're a teacher. So the whole idea of allowing students to learn on their own so that they can use online resources and others, digital resources, it's a little bit difficult, very, very difficult for people to swallow. So luckily for us, the Generation Z that are very current all over the world are also available in Africa. So that generation is the smartphone generation. They don't bother with lecture materials. In Africa, there are still universities where we teach with blackboard, with a chalk. We still do that in 2019. But we are now getting towards smart boards. We are now getting towards cases where we create linkages so that if there's a resource on a particular website, you can click a link and it takes you to that particular website and then to that particular resource. But it is a very hard thing to do because parents keep telling us all they want is they want their kids to get good grades so that they can get good jobs. Jobs are related to grades, and the grades are related to the way you learn. So sometimes you get a weird situation in which the student is actually smarter than the teacher, because the student is Generation Z. The teacher is a baby boomer. So you have this generation gap where the student understands and knows more about technology than the teacher who teaches him, who is supposed to guide him. Finally, in Africa, the whole idea of learning is that someone has to guide you. You have to have a master. You have to have somebody who teaches you the way. You have to have a guru, someone who guides you in what you do. That there's no way you can learn things on your own. But the digital economy and the knowledge-based economy that we're dealing with is about being independent, about learning independently, and about learning using resources that you can locate yourself. So we have quite a lot of challenge in the sense that people feel that they have to be guided, their hands have to be held, they have to be taken to a particular location, and they have to pass examination. Universities where students pass examinations very well are well patronized. Universities where students don't pass examinations are not patronized. And our university, being an ODL institution, was rejected at the beginning, simply because people feel that there is no way I can learn. Somebody has to make me learn. But luckily, we are getting there. We have established African Council for Distance Education, and most African countries are now keyed into ODL, and we hope that the future is very bright. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now all the panelists have introduced themselves, so you know kind of a little bit about where they come from and what they're interested in. And we've seen the introductory video with the Chinese examples. And I have a lot of questions to the panel, but I hope that you also have some. So please give me a signal if you would like to say something. Yes.
Hi, my name is Leonie. I'm here from Germany, from the National Union of Students. And I'm in a working group which works on the digital turn from a student perspective. And I'm interested in the question on what data do you really have to gather to help students to reach their goals?
Who would like to answer or comment?
Try to say something. Yeah. One of the criticisms of sort of learning analytics is that it's very behavioristic oriented, right? It's looking at behaviors of people, because that's the things they can measure very easily. You can know how long a person looks at a video, if they open class materials, things like that. So that's what we call learner-centric analytics. And if we really want to get to learning, and they do predictions, okay? They can say that good students, they have a lot of data that show that good students do the assignments and they do the quizzes that are available to them and they do these behaviors. But that doesn't really help those that don't get there. So we want to move to more learning-oriented analytics. And then you have to actually go into the quality of what students are doing. You have to, and then we come back to the whole problems of having a computer do an assessment and being able to look at, say, quality of an essay that someone's writing and giving them feedback on that. But one thing that people are doing is giving them, are really trying to relate the analytics to things like self-regulated learning and giving the data back to the students so they can reflect themselves on what they're doing. And there is a big amount of people looking at that at the moment, about how to do it. So if you look up learning analytics and self-regulated learning, you'll see some people that are showing examples of how to do that. Another thing that I could bring up that's sort of a bit related to that is people are, because a lot of the challenges, especially in the open and distance universities, are that you've got large numbers of students, and how can one teacher or 10 tutors possibly give the kind of feedback that students want? And what we know from, at least in Norway, what the students are asking for, they want more feedback. All students want feedback. That's how you learn. And, or that's part of the learning process, is to get good feedback. And so there's been a lot of research on essay marking. And there's a lot, especially in the English languages, there's quite a few really good essay tools that can give you feedback. When the researchers start looking at that, what ends up happening is you start to see conformity among the students, is that they're all getting the same feedback, so everybody becomes more alike, and their writing gets less creative and less, because we don't have that human judgment of being able to see, oh, this student is really good at irony, and maybe it's not conforming to exactly how I have to tell the computer that something should be written, so that creativity gets lost. So there's lots of issues about going over to using only sort of AI-based systems and things like that.
Thank you, Barbara. The two of us actually agreed that we should co-chair this panel discussion, so I'll challenge you to take a roaming microphone and move around the room as I do. But in the meantime, we have a question from a young man here.
I am a young man from Canada, and we're talking about data management and analytics. I feel like we're talking about what to do with it right now, with the exposure to it from the past 5, 10, 20 years of experience. And I feel like we're talking about what to do with it now, maybe for the next 5 to 10 years. I don't know who would be best suited to answer this, but where do you see this going 20, 30 years from now into the future? Because I feel like we're reacting to what to do with the situation right now, and it would be nice if we had a proactive idea of what to do 30 years from now, so that when we have new technologies that are just throwing out there, like neural links between minds, where we're not even typing on computers, we're not working with smartboards, it's all gone. We're just almost telepathically communicating with each other. Just get a little crazy for a second and just think, what are some things that we can be thinking about to prepare ourselves for a fantastic future like that instead of the next 1 to 10 years?
Wow, that's quite a challenge. Anyone in the panel or in the audience that would like to carry on, comment? 30 years from now?
Maybe I could say something. So if I understand well, you want to know what will be in the next 30 years, how we are going to where we are going from here, right? And the implications of the technologies. So if I may come back to 19th century, when we started the first revolution, now we have fourth revolution already. Every time that there is some change, there is some resistance about some people who don't want to change because they are more comfortable in their own habits, in their own settings, and the older you get, the less change you want. But somehow change occur even if you don't want. So I think that if we create a resistance mind, where you say every time there's a change and you feel stress, the only way I deal with that is I just go to school and sit for a course and then follow and then understand. When you understand, you are more open to accept changes, and changes are not always bad. But what I see in the media is sometimes people tend more to criticize rather than praise. If just remember that before we had the iPhone, if you get lost in the middle of the night or you are on the top of the mountain and you call for help, how do? You will die, sure. So if you see in these aspects, I think that surely humanity will go ahead, and sometimes we will behave like the extraterrestrials. Yeah, now already we cannot go without the iPhone or the GPS or whatever. So if you live until there, then you will tell your children, oh, when I was young, what that happened. That's what I'm saying to my children also. Thank you.
Yeah, just to give an African perspective, I still have kids who insist I have to give them printed materials. And I tell them there is a PDF on the website, and they don't know what a PDF is. Portable document format is there. And Adobe provides the software for you to read it on your iPhone. But they don't want that. So like she said, the 19th century created Luddite in Manchester when the new technology was introduced in the textile industry. People don't want to do that. So there will always be resistance. But I think in Africa, we pace that more. So we have Europe to watch. We have the history of technology in Europe and the way it was resisted and the way the resistance was overcome. So that by the time we get there, we'll be able to also overcome because we already have a template that works with it. But change is very, very difficult to accept, but it's inevitable. Try to live for 1 week without your phone. So no way you can survive, no way. Hell, not even 1 week. Try to survive without your phone for 1 hour. I can bet you're either sleeping unconscious or you are dead. You have to touch your phone every 20 minutes, every 30 minutes to see, like she has just done that now, just to make sure that your messages are there. So change is there. Technology helps us to move on. Now, ethically, is this right or is this wrong? Because we are losing our humanity. We are losing the community cohesiveness you talked about. There is a sense of community. So what's the community now? Is it an individual, interpersonal space community, or is it a virtual community? Which is more important? The village square for Africa or WhatsApp group or Telegram group? So you have a Telegram group and that's a community. You also have a village square where people see each other face to face and talk to each other. They learn about each other. But now you have, everything has been migrated into virtual communities. Is that good or is that bad? I have no answer for that.
I think that the reason it's such an interesting question, and actually there's something that you might be interested in reading, it came out this week actually. It was by Neil Selwyn and his colleagues, they're technologists in Australia, and they wrote a very interesting piece, and what they described it as was social science fiction. So they've written this as if it were a school in 2030, it's in Australia, and what they talk about is, when we think about the future in any sense, it's easy to have a truism about, the future's unseeable, but the future actually, probably the better way to think about it, I've always thought, is that it's made. I mean, the future doesn't happen, people actually create it every single day. And what's interesting about the article is they take quite a dystopian view. I mean, they talk about the way that in the future school, perhaps the student comes in and is told that she scored far too high on this test. We have her baseline figures, we know what we anticipate her to score. So we think about predictive analytics, things such as this. They can actually go in quite a deterministic direction where we actually are saying to a student, well, this is your baseline and you need to stick within that lane. The algorithms don't lie, when of course we know that algorithms have biases baked into them. There's no such thing as a neutral algorithm either. So there's a whole bunch of issues there, but I would definitely say that's the question I think that should be asked, and probably the best way to think about it then is, what does it look like? What do people want it to look like? I think that's probably an important point, or that'd be my 2 cents on it anyway.
Yeah, and I think also applies to your question in terms of okay, so what data do we need? But it's also a question for what data can we legally process, right? And ever since the entry into force of the GDPR, which we all know and love, we've been bombarded with these messages, right? Consenting to multiple items every day, and many of these kind of consents are are not necessary, right? Because that's only one of the grounds which a company or an institution is allowed to process data under the GDPR. And another one is the legitimate interest, right? That's a specific ground to process data. And I think what we're seeing there is that as long as the institution actually has the legitimate interest to process the data of, for example, the student, they are allowed to. Of course, there's a difference between here the government-owned institutions and the private ones. But the interesting thing is that legitimate interest is kind of taking us back to the ethical question, because what is legitimate? In terms of student data, for example, and maybe that's something you could comment on, Barbara, in terms of what is a legitimate use of student data. I mean, if we're trying to enhance and improve learning, isn't that legitimate in itself? Right?
Yep. Let me tag on to that, Snorre. Obviously, we collect and can collect and process a lot of data about the activities that goes on in learning management systems and in other systems in schools. And I guess that ideally we would like to use that data to improve the learning. But we can collect anonymous data. We have some personal data, and then we have some sort of very sensitive data. And there are probably legal and ethical differences between those types of data. And I wonder, what are actually the sensitive and difficult data to collect? Is there any ethical or legal requirements on what we actually can collect and how we deal with that? Is, for example, grades considered as very sensitive data? What is the...
Grades are not sensitive, actually. In Norway, at least in Norway, when we wanted to collect data at our university about students, we couldn't, grades are not classified as sensitive. What's sensitive was whether they were allowed to spend extra time taking an exam, because then it could be related to mental health, or it could be related to physical health. They had a broken arm or something. So that's where it sort of crosses over to the line. I was quite surprised myself. I thought grades would be sensitive for use. But I think that that's the questions we should be asking. I have an idea about. Can I go back first to the question you mentioned? I think that I from Canada as well. My father actually got his university to buy the second computer in Canada in 1958. So I've grown up and seen this sort of, if we're thinking technology and what the future is. I mean, I remember him telling us that IBM said in 1962, why would anyone want a personal computer? So who can predict really what's going to happen with the technology? But I think the most important thing to think about is what kind of students are we educating? What kind of skills do we need? And it scares me when people say that they don't care about the algebra, or they don't care about whatever, because the people who have created the engineering feats, they have pretty good domain knowledge about different fields. Maybe everybody doesn't have to have it, but we definitely need to have some people to have the really, deep math and domain skills and things. I think the things now we talk about creativity and innovation, of course those things are relevant as well, but we as humans are very adaptive. We manage to change our habits. As soon as our phone makes something more convenient for us, we do it. So it doesn't take very long for us to come the new way. So I think the things we need to be thinking is the dialogue about what are we educating for, what's the world like, and what skills do we need to be able to adapt and to change. And I have no problem thinking that people will be able to adapt to whatever the future is in 30 years. I think that.
Hello, my name is Hanna. I'm from Finland, and I'm a music and philosophy teacher at a higher secondary school. And I was wondering about the ethics of the AI, and about that example that you used about the autistic children, because like you said, that we're going through revolution again, and I'm thinking about, as a teacher, what is my responsibility, for example, with autistic children? Should I be teaching them to fit in that non-autistic group of people, or should I use the AI to make them feel better with things that they confront. So what should I do, and what's my responsibility as a teacher, or possibilities as a teacher?
Yes. Yeah, well, when we are doing, I think the rule applies to any case of applied ethics, because since ethics is an encouragement to do right, I think we will start with your heart first. If you look at a child and you say that this is an autist, because this science classifies her or him or her as not normal, not intelligent, not fit. It's the scale that human is giving to her, to that person. But if we live in a village where 99.9 are all autists, we will become regular. So it depends on how you treat from one to one. And as a teacher, you have to start there. If you see that the child needs encouragement or need time, then you know that if you have 25 children, I don't know how many you have in class. In Vietnam, you have 150 in class. Yeah. Here we have in Switzerland 16, and we have to go and pick up all the village to make it 20 so that we can teach. So it depends on the number. So the question is how to configure the class. If in the name of inclusive education we say normal children must mix with not so normal children, maybe you create a stress for the non-normal children because they don't have time to adapt. But I really remember in Norway, when I was in Norway, I was working as social assistant to Vietnamese refugees. So Norway has a very, very humanistic approach to inclusive education, in the sense that they really create the right conditions, even provide a taxi to the child to go to school because the mother cannot drive, and this kind of thing. So I think the question that I would do if I was a teacher and I have some children who cannot follow, either I will say, okay, Saturday you can come to my house, have breakfast with me. I will catch up with what you didn't understand so that you can follow in class on Monday. That's what we do with the children who are slow. And even with the people who are very bright, we also have catch-up class, because the curriculum is sometimes so heavy that the teacher do not manage to get everything, especially when we are approaching examining A-level, which is on a lifetime. If you don't pass it, that's it. You don't go into university, and you go to military, and you become a soldier, and you die. So you have no choice that pass. So as a teacher, I think that's how we would address that, without saying, is it right, is it not right, is the law allows, does the school say anything to me? You just, yeah, thank you.
Can I say something? Because I think the question was, if you see these kinds of systems that they can interact with, that takes them out of reality. That's what your question is about, because that's what I've heard that question before. And I don't know. I suspect that I would say that I'm not an expert on these systems, on especially those one. But I think that maybe if it's good for some part of the day, and they have to be not on these systems all the time, because they do have to exist in the outside of these systems as well. But I think they're very targeted to teach them certain skills. Yeah.
Okay, I think from African perspective again, inclusiveness in the classroom does not necessarily mean inclusiveness in the society. Yes, you have children who are, like you said, not normal, but we call them challenged children. Either they are deaf, or they are blind, or they have motion issues, and they are included as part of so-called normal children. But that does not equate to normality and inclusiveness in the outside society in Africa, where they are still segregated. where they are still not seen as part of normal. And that raised the issue of bullying, because kids who seem to be different from other kids are bullied. I know because I have an autistic grandchild who is just about 6 years old, couldn't talk, and so he gets bullied easily in the school. We have to take him to a special school. So in African societies, what we do is we create special schools for those physical challenged students. But if we are using inclusiveness, that is to include physical challenged children, then there has to be a mechanism created to make sure that the other so-called normal children deal with these kids as human beings, not as curious or weirdos or freaks or something like that. And assistive technology that we're using now, like for instance an iPhone and things like that, will help a lot with most of these things, particularly if their uniqueness and challenges are not communicable diseases. Like for instance, you cannot mix lepers with normal people because they may still have a communicable disease. But people who are blind or who are lame or people who are deaf or hard of hearing, we will have those issues. I am hard of hearing, not deeply hard of hearing, but I still face that challenge. And I'm poorly sighted. And I was part of a normal classroom, and I had to struggle through to hear what the teacher was saying. I had to struggle through to see what was on the board. And to make it worse, I was the smallest in the class, very tiny. So I was a target, an easy target. I have to start to develop ways of fighting back, both intellectually and physically, before I could find my way. And we don't want a situation where every physically challenged person in the classroom is fighting everybody. So I think the use of assistive technologies and what she said, a compassionate teacher will help towards creating an ethical platform for the students who are physically challenged to feel part of inclusive society, so that when they get out of the classroom, they still feel that they are part of a normal society. And technology will really help us with that, once they know that the technology is there. My autistic child went to school. Now we are taking him back to a normal school, and he's talking, simply because there was a psychologist in the classroom who was monitoring what he was doing. But in most African communities, unlike in Norway, where the refugees are given money to go to school, or even in Switzerland, where you have to go and drag kids from villages and take them to schools, the overpopulation of African schools is such that it becomes overwhelming, not only for the teachers, but for administrators. So you have a situation in which, in a classroom, you have not less than 150 students. In a university, I have classes that had over 2,000 students. And so there's no way you can create all this individual understanding of the students. You are dealing with a mob. You're not dealing with normal people. So this is the challenges we face in Africa. But like I said, we're getting there, and the assistive technology is helping us get there.
Can I bring up one thing that I had thought we would get from the audience, especially when I show these different technologies? People haven't asked about, what are we doing with all this data that we're collecting? Should we be keeping it over time? Is it used just for making a system adaptive and then we throw it out? Does anyone not have any questions around that? Because I think it's quite interesting, because if we look at the Chinese examples, they're collecting all that data and they're probably not throwing it out, I would guess. That would never happen in my country. We would not be allowed to collect that kind of data. And this is where Anne would bring in the fact that it's very culturally dependent upon culture as to what's acceptable. So how can we make judgments about what other countries are doing? And with the GDPR in Europe, we have a very different perspective than you have in North America. In the US, you don't have any protection about it. Universities can use your marks from primary school to determine whether you should be allowed to come into university or not. In Norway, by the time you're 18, you're on your own. They would never look at who your parents were or what your parents' education, jobs were, or anything. Yet in the US, that can be part of the algorithms they're using for acceptance into universities. So nobody has questions about this at all? That surprises me.
Well, I have some reaction on the film. Actually, I didn't have the same reaction as a lot of people would say, oh, how shocking. Actually, I thought, oh, very interesting. How to get what kind of data you have, how is it processed, how can it be made now. I understand that this is a national mission of China to show that the population of China is progressing. It's a very nationalistic approach, not anything with individual liberty or freedom, because in China there has never been much liberty, and I can say it because for Vietnam, where I grew up to 18 years old, it was the war, and after the war we turned communist, and I saw how society was controlled. And so we became so used to be controlled. Even the policeman can come into my mosquito net on my bed at 10 o'clock just to go open my mosquito net. I was sleeping, and then sit in my bed and talk to me because he was following me. He didn't even say, oh, I have a question. He just say, I have the mission to follow you because I was an interpreter. And I was guiding tourists and so on. So they were following me. And sometimes I'm having my bag, and then suddenly my bag disappear. The whole thing disappear. And then 6 years later, somebody say, oh, we got your bag, but there was nothing inside. So you see, living into that condition, being monitored was very normal to us. So when I was working as secretary to a lawyer, and I always inform him a lot of things, and when I'm writing to clients, I also inform. He say, you don't need to tell all that. So I was very shocked that I say, why we have to say, because in any case they are entitled to know. But you see, that's the way that it is a difference where when cultural differences may lead to different interpretation. And even now that I've lived in the West for 35 years, I still think that it's normal that people can, if somebody says to me, what's up, you are monitored, I say, so what? They can monitor me. I have nothing to hide. So I think that if you want to hide something, keep it for yourself, don't say it. Because the moment that you say it, or you think, or maybe you write, or you tell somebody, it's no more a secret. So you can't say that you are infringing my secrecy, because you yourself, you are willing to share. Or if you sign up on LinkedIn, and then on LinkedIn I'm getting to try to introduce myself to certain people because I think their profile is interesting. They say, what is it for? I say, oh, I thought that when you are in LinkedIn, you are waiting for us to connect. So you see, so how can you not allow people to connect when you say, I'm here open to connect? So, thank you.
Thank you. We are getting closer to the conclusion of this session. I will allow one final comment or question from the audience if someone really, really would like to say something. This is the last chance. It's yours.
Barbara, I would like you to pretend that I asked the question that you wanted to answer, like the one about what's happening with all the data that is being gathered in learning analytics, and what is the potential to misuse it, actually?
There is no one answer to that. I think there's a discussion, for example, in Norway about higher education data. Are we going to have a central learner store where we keep all the data? We have in schools own the data. This is another thing, that people own data. That's really interesting to me. And I think that each country has their own interpretation of it. In Norway, for instance, if you do leave behind digital data by using applications that the school has, those data belong to the school. As soon as you're 18 or at university, they belong to you, and you have to give consent. And so this is regulated, at least in Europe, by GDPR and the way you want to interpret the consent for it. One thing that's interesting in Norway right now is that we're having a new digitalization strategy for higher education and research. So it's coming top down. And there's been a long process, and one of the units that's been organizing the work with that has put in a recommendation to the new university and college law that says that institutions have a duty to use student data to improve the learning and the learning environment. And that's very interesting when you start getting into the legal issues around it. It would be the duty of the institutions to use the data.
And I think that was the final words from the panel. And I would like to thank you very much, each individual in the panel. I think that we have just scratched upon some of the intriguing, challenging, and interesting issues here. And I would like to remind you what I started to say this morning, that ICDE, which I work for, has published this global guidelines, ethics in learning analytics, which could be downloaded and read. And I think that is an interesting perspective to continue the discussion from here. So I recommend that you have a look at that, and by that I will thank you all, the panel and the audience. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion.